In this session, we discuss managing urgency, fear, and the influence of our political environment on our work. Welcome to the AFTA podcast. I am Naveed Zamani and I am your host. In this session, I'm excited to be speaking with Paola Ortiz. Paola is a licensed marriage and family therapist and supervisor in Austin, Texas. She is the founder of Ortiz Therapy Group, a group practice that offers therapy services in Texas and New York. Paola provides therapy in English and Spanish to individuals, couples, and families. She enjoys working with people who identify as part of marginalized identities and communities, such as neurodivergent folks, LGBTQIA folks, and anyone impacted by multicultural and immigration-related experience through a first and generation lens. Paola, welcome. This session, I'm asking interviews for a story about a time in their clinical practice that they feel they failed and what they learned. So thanks again for joining us and bring us into your world a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you. Happy to be here. And I'm fairly new to AFTA. It's been about 3 years. And so I think ever since I joined, I've been very excited to learn from other people. And so I'm nervous, but I'm excited to be here and just to kind of share my own stories and my own path on it. And so thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you for being here. And we're excited to learn from you.
I think the main thing that I kept coming back to in my couples work, especially with my specialty of seeing bicultural, multi-heritage relationships, I often find myself getting a sense of their urgency, right? There's a couple of people that I have in mind that often, for example, one came in last year talking about like, oh, we're having a hard time deciding who we should spend the holidays with and fix it, do it now. Right. Or, there's just so many stories like it, right? Like we have this big problem and we need to fix it now. So there's just this constant theme of urgency. And I have often felt myself getting carried away in that urgency while forgetting or maybe constantly having to remind myself like, hey, what people put in, get out of therapy. And I think having to remind myself of that maybe takes me out of the process a little bit. And not that it's a bad thing, right? But just a lot of self-therapist work and that comes out. But, when you think about a system of cultures combining, everything combining, family expectations, gendered roles, and just how people choose to spend the holidays or whatever it is that they choose to do with families or how they want to present in their life. I think that always comes up in these conversations. And when there's more than one person involved, it's, well, I want to do this now, right? And so all without maybe acknowledging all the work that could be done before getting to that decision-making process. And so I'm often comfortable being direct, right? Or directive in those moments and just to slow the process down. But every now and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing my job. Or I'll have people come in and say like, well, we've been coming here for 4 sessions now and nothing's changed. And so every now and then, if I feel like I have good rapport, I'll ask like, well, what do you think you've done so far outside of session? Right. And oftentimes it's like, well, nothing. I'm like, oh, interesting. Where can we go from there? But yeah, that's kind of the general idea of things that what I was really thinking about.
Yeah, thank you, Paola. I think I certainly can. I imagine many, if not everyone who's worked with couples can really relate to the urgency some couples come in with, which makes sense. I think relational suffering is intense and things are high stakes when marriages or relationships are on the line. And I'm appreciating what you're saying, this piece about like getting carried away in urgency. There's a part of it that's like self-therapist work, if I heard you right. And also like how it is that you maybe are slowing the process down and also kind of checking in with how they're understanding progress of therapy. Like what are my contributions? What are their contributions? If I kind of track that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be completely honest, I'm curious about every corridor of that response. I wonder if maybe I could ask you first, especially because you kind of located your work in the context of bicultural and multi-heritage families, if I heard that right.
Mhm,
When it comes to like kind of your self-therapist work and the reflexivity, the communities that you serve and urgency,
mhm.
I wonder what like I don't know, like experiences or stories you could bring us into to make visible what urgency looks like in that intersection.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, as soon as I had written this down when I was preparing, I had this flashback that always stays very fresh in my mind. And when I was an intern in 2017, summer 2017, and my parents are Spanish speaking, and I had this couple who was also Spanish speaking, and I just remember seeing myself in this very small room, and this couple starts to argue in Spanish, and I have this almost like out of body experience where I'm like taken back. I'm like, I'm a child again,
Mm,
right? Whether, middle school, high school, just watching these two people, arguing and trying their best to express themselves, but obviously in a very potentially harmful way. And in my mind, that out of body experience. And I'm just like in my head trying to shift all the textbooks I've read. I'm like, there's nothing in my brain that's coming back to me so I can address this, right? If I couldn't do anything then, I feel like I can't do anything now. And again, I came back to myself and I slowed the process down and I said, well, maybe I could speak up then, but they weren't listening. But maybe I'm in a position right now where maybe they would be more likely to hear me out.
mm,
And so I remember saying, you like, let's take a break, let's take a moment. And I said something to the effect of like, I don't think that you're coming here to use your time or to spend your money on having the same fights that you're having at home.
mm.
And
This is all in
they were like,
Spanish,
oh,
right?
yes, all
Yeah.
in Spanish, right? And so just being able to do that and be like, hey, I'm just going to interject and we'll see how it goes, right? And it all went fine and it worked out. And but I just always remember that fear of like not being able to help, right? Not being able to provide the kind of support that maybe that they needed, but just knowing that, hey, I'm a person showing up in the system in a hopefully different way, right? And why it's always so important to address our own things outside of the therapeutic space. But I feel like that was such an important moment for me to acknowledge how present our own stories and our own background can
Mm,
be in that space. And they weren't even from like the Mexican culture. It was just they were speaking Spanish, right? And I was like, oh my God, that was enough. That was enough to drive me back. Um, but ever since I have noticed there was a presentation that Tabitha had done that I always kept in mind. I think she was talking about how to use AI in therapy. I don't know if you remember that presentation, but she was talking about making the implicit explicit or something like that. And I've always been wearing a little heart tracker. And I noticed that in my work with couples, when there's high conflict, my heart rate just plummets and I am even keeled.
mm,
Everything is just, we're all right, right? If there's a couple or an individual who's having a good time in therapy, I'm like, my heart rate's like, okay, is everything fine? And so I remember thinking like, oh, I'm okay with high conflict couples, right? People coming in who are very distressed and just having this, just really big emotions, right? Trying to be heard and seen and understood. But from then on, I was like, okay, there's something about this kind of space, these types of conversations, these types of clients that I'm perfectly comfortable with. Um, just every now and then when it is verbalized, oh, hey, we haven't fixed X, Y, and Z, whatever that looks like. And now, of course, with added context, right? The political climate and the fears and the concerns about any and all the things that you could think of that
mm,
people of color are experiencing, and particularly, people with immigrant backgrounds. And so all of that is coming into play. And so there's a lot of more, there's just so much more that's come into the therapy space that is out of our control. And there is more urgency, there is more fear. And so this other couple that I'm thinking about, all of that intersects, right? Hey, we're going to talk about the day-to-day stuff, but at the same time, oh, you're worried about whether or not you might be deported or not,
mhm,
right? And how can we validate this piece that's so completely out of control and out of our hands at the same time that we're talking about your dynamic and what it looks like to support each other on the day to day, right? While you're working from home and trying to deal with each other's needs and wants. And so I may have deviated from your question, but that came from the top of mind, right? Like how all of these things are coming into play at the same time, that they do come in with this urgency and wanting to talk about that. And so like the self of the therapist piece is always just kind of in the background at the same time that I acknowledge my standing in the world, but knowing that it is okay to slow down and understanding when I can validate as much as possible. And that's sometimes all I can do, to be with, and sharing that as much as possible. I really like to share that with my clients, right? Like I'm very open in very collaborative, right? Very conversational, as you say. And I will tell you why I'm asking the things I'm asking, right? And just being open about why this can be so difficult and why I might feel the same things that you are, where our circumstances are. And so I think for couples that has been validating in the past year, but at the same time, there's just this out of control sense of, well, I don't know what my future looks like, because whatever the current administration might do, it's going to change. And we'll let you know on Monday how things are going to be different or the same. Right. And so it's potential life-changing decisions, right? Like, okay, what will happen if you are deported? Where do we stand? Am I moving? Are we going to try and face this together or not? And so it's just it snowballs into a much bigger decision than you would think. Division of labor, that kind of conversation, right? And so, anyway, I would keep talking, but so.
No,
Yeah.
thank you, Paola. And always feel free to keep talking. Yeah, there's such a richness in what you're describing in so many levels. I mean, I'm appreciating the ways that you're, at least if I heard you right and edited me here, like, yeah, maybe the close proximity between urgency and fear. And also in that sense, then how fear and uncertainty are closely connected in this particular political climate and the way that the administration is, I don't want to use a too neutral of a word here because it's quite oppressive and wild. But yeah, like kind of what's going on with the ICE raids and the deportations and this sense of uncertainty of what's going to happen with not just my life in the United States, but with the organization of my family and the division of labor, like you said. So already urgent scenarios that are happening relationally are compounded by this broader political fear and uncertainty. Yeah. And then, I want to be careful because some of what you said, like really directly connected to some of my own experiences and some of the conversations I've had with my own kind of like team and supervisees. But this piece of experiencing a couple, especially maybe a couple that's older than myself or us, if I could say that, like how especially in the language of our home or the language of our family, it positions us in a different way in that family context. Like I've heard a lot of my students say like, oh, and this couple started arguing in Arabic and they're Arabic speaking, or for me, like Farsi, it's like, oh, I feel like that kid again. And it's like my aunt and uncle, or it's my mom and dad. And so if I heard you right, like there's something there about maybe that urgency gets amplified in that positioning, or maybe not.
I mean,
yeah, please.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think that fear was very visceral that first session that I had as an intern, right? And I think now when it happens, maybe I experience it more in a little more frustration than maybe feeling like I don't know what to do. And so, but it's more of like, oh, I'm going to process this at the end of the day. And not so much I'm going to have that moment I had as an intern, but just being able to connect it like, yes, I'm really frustrated right now because X, Y, and Z, or this person literally said to my face, oh, well, I guess I haven't tried anything. It's like, okay. So then why having to defend our work? Not in that way, not in a defensive stance, but hey, like I promise, this takes time. There's a lot of people that are very uncomfortable with hashing out a lot of things, but that is part of the process before you can move forward, before you can make any decisions. We need to explore, well, what's the process? Well, like what's going on there? What's the history? What's led to you maybe not wanting to spend time with their family? can we look at that, right? Before you like, well, you need to tell us how we need to spend our time with our families, right? Is it not fair? Shouldn't it be 50-50? And it's like, before we can get to that conversation, there's a lot of uncomfortable things that we need to face. And so I think I redirect my frustration in that way, maybe with regards to accountability, right? And what that looks like for them, right? Because I'm always very clear, like, I will help you fight for what you want, but you have to decide what that looks like. Maybe not specifics, right? But I'm happy to help you and support you and encourage you to co-create the type of relationship you want to have and you want to be in, and that you're capable of contributing to. We're not here to replicate. We're here to acknowledge how our parents or our grandparents' relationships have impacted us. What do you want to take from that? What do you want to keep? To understand all of that first, right? We can't just go in there swinging and saying, yeah, well, this is what it's going to be because this is what's fair. And it's like, yeah, no, fairness is definitely important. But if we don't have an established history about understanding or wanting to know like where your partner comes from and how that's, I don't know, shifted their view about how to spend the holidays or how to raise their children or how you want to take a vacation, something as simple as that. And it can just be, it's difficult to bring all of that in and let two people be seen and heard and understood in 50 minutes.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's kind of where that frustration comes in every now and then. But I think it's different, the fear into frustration, but it all comes down to, I want to help you, but also I hope you decide to help yourself in that same sense, so.
Right. I mean, just honoring how short 50 minutes is. And at least in my experience, insurance is not paying really for anything beyond that. And they pay less for couples and family work. So the system is like set up against doing the highly complicated relational work, which I need to acknowledge in the context of a podcast, at least in this season where I'm asking about failure, that we're really talking about failure in the context of a system setting us up for failure. And yeah, like, I'm really appreciating like what it takes to slow down and explore and really connect with the fullness of a couple's histories and experience in the face of them being like, okay, we need some sort of results, whatever that is. So it's like critical tension between slowing down and pacing it fast enough so that the couple gets kind of what they need, I suppose. I feel like you've spoken to it several times here, but in the spirit of making it explicit, what have you found to be the practice of slowing down couples and kind of managing this tension?
I remember my favorite professor and clinical supervisor just always highlighting this process over content, and I like to share that with clients and just kind of share what that means to me. And oftentimes it'll happen in session, right? If they start having an argument and just it goes on and just freezing it in that moment. And that's when I love to talk about Mona's work, right? When we talk about the vulnerability cycle. And I'm like, let me point out, kind of what I'm observing as an outsider and just being able to, I feel like this happened maybe 2 weeks ago where she was like, I just don't know why we're talking about that again. It's like, that's not so much the content that we're focusing on. We're focusing on how the questions were asked or the approach, or did you notice how so-and-so reacted? What was that like? What do you think that was like for them? And I do say that out loud, like maybe this will sound redundant, or maybe, talking about talking doesn't feel like it's moving fast enough, but there is something to be said for what you gain when you slow down. And I feel like a lot of people have been receptive to that, especially if they come back and say, we slow down, or we pretended you were in the room. And we're like, what would Paola say, right? Like, oh, maybe slow down. Or you can always ask, this is what I heard. Is that accurate, right? And like, it might sound silly for some people, but it's just, you can always clarify. There's always room for clarification, and just slowing that piece down, I think, can really help. And then there might be people who are just not up for it, and that's okay too, right? And so whenever I do highlight that, like, just there's opportunities, and sometimes we can take them, and sometimes it'll work out really well, or other times it'll explode our face, which is okay. Sometimes this work is trial and error, and that might not sound great, but everyone's different, right? I'm not making an assumption that what works for this couple will work for you too.
Right. Right.
Context matters, right? And so I think that helps some people to know that, one, that they're not alone, but also it's also okay if this piece doesn't work really well for you. We can move on and try something else,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. But the theme of it is, slowing down or acknowledging all the pieces that we can put down because we have no control over it. And a lot of that has been political, whatever the concerns are. And so being able to name that and be mad with them, right? And share that frustration, I feel like that's probably been at the forefront of my work in the last year and a half. I mean, always, right? Because it's the populations that I work with, but most specifically since 2016. But definitely, this year, just being able to name it and being able to talk about it, because I still find myself surprised, but then not, that how there's still some clinicians out there who are not comfortable talking about politics in the therapy room. And I think that is a little scary, I think, sometimes. But when I do give room for that in our therapy work, people feel really relieved to be able to share that frustration, knowing that there's sometimes nothing that we can do, or there's very little that we can manage around it. And I feel like that relieves some of the tension, and maybe some people are more willing to slow down in that moment. It's kind of depending on what it is.
Yeah, Paula, I guess I want to ask you a little bit about how you've been managing the political turmoil in your sessions, like how it comes up. Because I don't know, I guess I'm drawing on my own experience. I like as an Iranian man working with Middle Eastern families, and at the time of this recording, we're just after Thanksgiving in the holiday season in 2025. There was just that attack on the two National Guard folks in DC, and now there's like this whole nationwide review of Afghan citizenship, even if they're already, from what I understand and have read so far. Um, so ways that certain identities are utilized as broader political efforts, and just the injustice that happens and all that. And so how I'm wrapped up both in, how do I say this, like the politics of my clients and the politics that I engage with, they're in the same umbrella, I suppose.
Right.
And full disclosure, I paused this before I asked Paula this question to make sure this is okay. That's, I think, speaks to the sensitivity of this political moment.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you're willing to share a little bit, like how have you been managing these tensions, these conversations? How do you slow down people who are slowing down is actually dangerous? And like, I don't know, if that even makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very easy for me to look back on the day of elections, right? Last November. And the clients that I had that day, well, honestly, I think at this point, I think probably like 90% of my clients are people of color. And that day, at the end of the day, I was meeting with a couple. I love them. Been seeing them for a few years now. And also, I keep thinking back to Tabitha, right, about neurodivergence and being able to just be yourself in the space. And at the end of the day, they walked in and we were like, ugh. We all just took a deep breath and just, we were all feeling it. You didn't need to name it. We just felt the heaviness and the stress of it. And, we started talking about whether or not they felt grounded and what they've been doing to take care of themselves that day. And I said, do you want to sit on the floor? And they're like, can we? And I'm like, oh yeah, let's sit on the floor. Let's try to bring some sort of, I don't know, groundedness just to the space. And we'll sit here, and it's the three of us having a very similar reaction to what's going on, right? And being able to share that, just listening to their fears, their concerns, what was coming up for them, what they hope to do, who they hope to reach out to. And talking about community has been a huge component in the past year, right? About dealing with the environment in general. And when we are spending time together, sharing that space, it's the being with. So that's very important. The community piece is very important. And showing up as best as we can. And sometimes if that means that I'm going to sit on the floor with my clients, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And it felt right. Right. And I think when we speak to those needs and how we can show up for each other, because it felt like, well, we can't control anything outside of this. Right. And so if that helps, great, we'll do that. And so outside of that, and since that day, I've been talking to clients about safety plans. I've been talking about, do you feel safe in your own space? How much energy and time is it taking out of your day to be hyper aware of your surroundings, right? How comfortable are you being in a safe space? Oh, and I should mention that I'm in Texas, right? I might be in Austin, but it's a bubble, but still, right? It's still Texas, and just walking around can feel a little unsafe sometimes, or who you're with, or the questioning of people who have been in your community, but maybe wondering, oh, did they vote for him or did they not? Just like all these questions and hyper awareness, and it's like it's more of the same, but it's a little heightened, right? And so I think these conversations that I'm having are revolving around validating, like, yeah, no, we've been experiencing this all of our lives. We've been people of color all of our lives, right? This hyper awareness is not new. It's just more of it. And now other people, other populations are like, oh, this is bad. I'm like, yeah, no, it's really bad. Welcome.
Yeah.
We're tired. Right. And so being able to share something as simple, I mean, maybe it's not simple, but it's easy to share, right? Like, yeah, no, I'm tired too. What do you think? Right. Then acknowledging that piece and knowing that, well, we can hold this space together and give some breathing room to talk about how stressful work has been, or something like, oh, we had an argument about, our pet or something, or just something simple that is still happening in the background while we're talking about
Right.
safety plans. And that it's okay that we're talking about that, and that if somebody calls them dramatic, it's like, no, right? If this is something that you need, that's what we're going to talk about. Women's healthcare, all of those things, right? People worried about whether or not they can share certain things. And it's like validating as much as possible, but people will decide when they feel safe enough to talk about certain things in therapy, right? Because we're still part of the system that isn't necessarily built to help everyone in the same way. And just acknowledging that and saying that out loud, I think also helps my clients know that I also see that, right? Even if I am a therapist, even there's a hierarchy of sorts that they feel like, oh, I'm coming to you to talk to you about it. But there's so much that goes on, but at the same time, validating, like, hey, we share something. And because we're able to talk about that openly, there is a little bit of safety in that, and just being able to move in the world and still do the day-to-day stuff while trying to come to therapy and manage all these other stressors that are still part of our lives. I don't know, it's a lot. So it's like, it's managing, but what does that look like for everybody? It's different. It changes every day.
Yeah.
And it goes back to community, seeking other therapists or other friends who are also doing the same work and that also want care. If I want support, say, hey, I had this really complicated conversation today. Oh yeah, no, you know what I mean? And so it's just, it comes back to community.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like sometimes that's all we have in a sense, right? Conversation. That's all we have sometimes. So it's kind of what I try to stick to.
Yeah, I so appreciate your response. There's something, and let me know if this is fair, like there's something so symbolic, I suppose, about you sitting on the ground with your clients in that moment. Like, as you're speaking about community and kind of, if I heard you right, like, yeah, we're all going through this together and it's becoming visible to a lot of people. For some folks who've, like to use your language, like people of color who've kind of been going through this, it's been visible for a long time. It's just now there's more eyes on it. The intensity
Mm-hmm.
maybe at times shifts, the uncertainty around it, perhaps, maybe. Um, but it's not new. There's practices, but also what it's like for a therapist of color to sit on the ground with clients of color and kind of be in a moment, a shared moment together of what's going on and how are we managing this is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'll share this, Paolo. I'll say it carefully because it's a kind of a question or interest I have directed at you, but I don't want you to feel like you need to answer it if you don't feel comfortable.
Okay.
But for myself, my relationship to the institutions, well, I've always been a bit wary of the institutions that I participate in as a therapist, but
Hmm.
especially now, like I have a lot of concerns and questions around mandated reporting and child welfare services and the ways that there's often a very clear insistence that, oh, these systems, no, it's all good, nothing will happen, but I have not seen that to be the case, and actually I have experiences that prove otherwise. And there are kind of, what is it called? I forget the legal term, but there are impacts on being in the CWS system or calling 911 and then being in that system and then immigration and um, kind of like these systems all talk to each other.
Hmm.
And so I've been finding myself very less, not that I was, but like even less trusting of, I don't know, doing a CWS report. Like I don't trust that it's actually going to help the family or not make things worse. So I wonder, especially I'm here in San Diego, California. Um, I wonder what it's like for you in Texas. Any identities you're holding with the communities you're working. How do you manage your professional responsibilities and the threat of the institution?
Well, uh, it's one of the things that I feel like I'm pretty vocal about. And so if you called any of my therapist friends, they were like, oh yeah, she, totally does X, Y, and Z. But I feel like there's the advocacy piece, and then there's also what you're willing to acknowledge and to say, right? Like, I can't remember who I was talking to. There was a CPS situation where I was consulting someone, and they're like, well, just think of the purpose. They're there to help the family. And I'm like, but this person's background very different than mine, right? And it's like, oh, you do believe that this is there to help.
Yeah, and just for people listening, you had a very skeptical face you put on there.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Very suspicious. And it was more of a reminder, right? I love this person, I trust them very much, but just a different background, right? And so very black and white, like, no, this system is there to help. And so if I were you, I would report X, Y, and Z. And I was like, oh, okay, we'll see. And then I talked to two other people. And by this point, I was already crying because I was like, I have a very big hesitation about this particular case that I was seeing. And, I think the other two people that I was speaking to were very, talked it through with me, but from a very different lens, like validating, like, no, that's totally true. Like, that's a legitimate fear, right? Especially if people who are of mixed status, right? Like, is this going to help or is this going to destroy a family?
Yeah.
Right. There's so many different avenues I feel like there are to choose from. But at the same time, if I'm thinking like, well, okay, is this going to put me and my license in harm's way? Maybe, maybe not, and I'm not confirming or denying that I did anything wrong. But at the end of the day, I think of myself as a bridge, right? Here's what I learned in grad school, the Eurocentric, typical westernized way of dealing with things. And then there's me, and then there's the people that I love and cherish and want to work with and support. It's like I'm a bridge, right? I'll take what I learned here and filter it through and figure out what is going to be the most helpful, right? What's at the center of what I feel like will be the most supportive and actually truly provide resources that can be helpful, right? And so I feel like it's a very tricky balance, especially being in Texas, especially with people leading our boards, how they choose to do things, what they feel is appropriate training or not.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think I'll get in trouble for sharing this if anybody from Texas is listening, but there was this whole initiative from very particular therapists who were like, we don't need to take diverse counseling or diverse CEUs. Like, it's unnecessary. It's a waste of time. And I think they ended up removing that CEU wording that, like, when everything about diversity and DEI was coming
Oh,
out. It's like, well,
okay.
we don't need that and it needs to be removed. And I was like, this is more of the same. It's the typical response and action taken when it comes to BIPOC populations, right? Well, that's extra work, or we don't need that,
Right.
or you don't get to tell me how to do my job, or there's just some scary things that I saw out there. I'm like, man, I really have to remember that there are certain people that I can, and by people I mean therapists, that I can and cannot trust,
Right.
which is why going back to the community piece of like, I know that there's people that I trust and people that I talk to on a regular basis and that I'm happy to refer to. But at the same time, maybe this needs to be a little more tight knit community where I'm like, I know that I trust you because of X, Y, and Z. Right. And so, but it was it was a good reminder about where I am and what people believe and where they stand. And, so many agencies like overworked, underpaid, and I totally understand, right? But at the same time, it's what we prioritize will show and how we work, how we show up in our practices, how we show up in the community. And I feel like that just says a lot about where we are, right? So it's just about being careful and staying true to your values as much as possible, but it is exhausting, right? That if I turn around and speak to a therapist who's different values than I do, and they say, I don't think it's valuable to learn about how to be aware of my entitlement. That's the right word, but just about, how important it would be for them to talk about cultural humility or what that looks like, or to explore what it's like to ask questions that are, I don't know, I keep thinking back to this agency where I worked and me and this other person were talking about like, hey, what if we include this in the assessment? Like it would be really helpful about what role has culture played in your life, which we thought was a pretty general question, right? But one of the therapists was like, oh, the assessment's already so long. Oh, I just don't have time to do that. That was just like, are you joking? Right? Nobody said anything. Nobody spoke to this associate and was like, hey, you don't think that this is a concern? And, it just kind of goes on. The conversations are the same. They stay the same. The priorities are the same. And I think that's where the frustration comes in, right? And so it's like, well, I don't want to be frustrated anymore. I'm going to withdraw myself from certain spaces and surround myself with people who will be supportive and understanding and validating as much as possible, right? And what does that look like? So I can feel strong enough to help my clients who maybe feel like they don't have those types of resources. That's, tiring.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like we can show up as best as we can, as often as we can.
Yeah, I guess I'm appreciating too your use of the word exhausting because it is exhausting. That word fits for me. And at least for me, how challenging it is to be the best I can when I'm exhausted. I was thinking about, I don't know if this is actually true. So folks listening, hold this tentatively. I remember reading somewhere that one of the reasons that like just traveling, because when you go in an airport and you're traveling, you're kind of just sitting a lot, but then you get exhausted. And I was reading that like one of the reasons for that exhaustion is that you're just kind of confronted with a bunch of new decisions constantly. Like you're not in a routine or something familiar that you can rely on or trust. So you just have to keep every corner of the day you're making a new decision. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking what that might be like applied to kind of the work that you're describing, Paolo, where you're not given the luxury of saying like, yeah, like, oh yeah, child abuse. I'm gonna make a report. It's like, okay, child abuse. I need to like look out for this kid, and also assessing to what degree to involve the state and introduce political violence into a family to address that mandate. I suppose
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of decisions. That's a lot of ethical questions that are really challenging with no clear right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And from my own research too, just like learning about how the professional license and the fear of losing it is its own really powerful force that kind of, yeah, shapes our attention to being in compliance because that's our livelihood and we've worked so hard for it. And is it quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote worth losing my license
Yeah.
to take like an activist stance?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of decisions and it is extremely exhausting. So
Yeah.
appreciating how you're speaking about that.
Yeah.
As we're kind of wrapping up, Paula, I want to, maybe this is a strange question. Like I said earlier, I paused to check in if I could ask you some more questions about the political moment and how you're managing it. And I think people's willingness to speak to what's going on is varied, rightfully. At risk of asking a kind of a poor question, I suppose, like how have you managed to find the capacity to or the ability
Mm.
to speak to what's going on? Because it sounds like you are, like you said, like you're open on your website and all your writing and all this stuff about your position. How have you managed that at a time where it's kind of scary to do that?
It's a really great question. Well, I don't know how much this is a part of it. And just to mention it directly, is I received my ADHD diagnosis early in the year, I think January. And I got the combined type, and I was like, oh, well, these things make so much sense. And, you know, thinking about that perspective and not trying to like hash out what's me, what's ADHD, or what's all of it, right? But the impulsivity aspect of like being a woman of color, immigrant parents, and this idea I get so tired of people talking about resilience. It's like, it'd be cool if we were in an environment where we didn't need to be resilient.
Yeah.
But just talking about like not necessarily proving the point or doing things out of spite. No, not at all. And I think Andy mentions that sometimes, but it's more about, I feel like I have no choice. Not in a, oh, I have to do this. Like, no, I want to do this. And I don't see a world or a realm where I'm not speaking up about it. Right. I feel very protective of my clients and my people, as we could say, right? Like all of these populations. And I feel like sometimes I do need to remind myself, especially in public, right? Like if somebody makes a snide remark or something, my reaction's pretty quick, like to defend and protect, right? And so then whenever I reflect, I'm like, oh man, maybe that wasn't the best decision. Right. And so I feel that for my clients sometimes too, right? If they're talking about a very bad relationship, and in my head, I'm like, oh, that makes me so mad. Or I wish I could say something more than, the things that we're already talking about. And I think that's maybe one of the primary drives,
Mm.
right? Of maybe feeling that, because the majority of my family is in central Mexico, right? So Mexico City. And so it's like there's this need to defend and to protect. And so there's just no other way. It feels like that's just how it's going to be, right? For example, there was a protest here a couple months back, and Andy, my husband, asked me, he's like, hey, like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? Because we're just walking downtown. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, I'm fine. I was like, wait, are you okay? And he's like, well, I'm nervous. Like, I'm stressed out. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not scared. I was like, this is my environment, right? You're a tall white guy with green eyes. Like you don't walk in my shoes. You see me and you hear about it constantly, but you were not in this body, in this experience to like, I am hyper aware all of the time.
Mm.
I don't have to be in a protest or, to feel that. That's just all the time, right? So it's just kind of like a way of being. And I get reprieve and love where I can with my friends and family, with chosen family here. And I'm just motivated to help and support my clients and my friends and just the people that I work with, just because I know how it feels,
Yeah.
right? To be oppressed in any capacity, to be ignored or put to the side in whatever work environment I've ever been in. And so it's like, I think whenever I switched to private practice in the middle of the pandemic, it's like August of 2020, like finally, I am free of working with people who I'm no longer under anybody else to tell me what to do. I can finally speak up. I can say the things that I've been wanting to say, and no one's going to tell me otherwise. So I feel like I've been on this, like, I'm finally me. Not that I wasn't me before then, but it was definitely quieter, dimmer, right? Smaller. And I feel like now any kind of involvement that I have with organizations, I'm like, hey, this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
This is what I speak to. This is what's important to me. And if you don't like it or if it makes you uncomfortable, that sucks, right? But hopefully we're able to have a conversation around it. And if not, that's okay. I'll just know that you're not my person.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's just a motivation to, I don't know. I feel like it always goes back to self of the therapist or inner child work. We're like, well, I want to be the person that maybe I didn't have around, or maybe my parents felt like they couldn't protect me or advocate for me because one, they couldn't speak the language, or two, they didn't know how to advocate or they didn't know the system at all. Right. So it's like, if I'm going to have that knowledge, why wouldn't I?
Right.
And so I think that that's kind of where I get my energy or my drive. But oftentimes I feel like in that typical sense of at least my culture and how I associate it, it's like, well, or you could sit and rest. I don't know. You can relax and be like, it's okay if you just do sit and binge something that you want to watch. And I think I'm finding those moments more and more, at least in the last couple of years. And so just knowing that the work that I'm doing that I really love, I love my clients. And so being able to do that, I'm advocating enough. And that I've given myself permission, like, it's okay that you're not doing all of these other things. And it's good enough.
Yeah.
And so it's just the constant, just no choice to keep going other than to keep going, so.
Yeah. Thank you, Paola, for your rich response and for letting me ask a question. And I hope maybe folks who are listening who relate to some of what you're saying might find their own, if they don't have it already, can add to their inspirations to kind of find the communities they need to be in useful resistance to what's going on right now. Paola, if folks wanted to kind of connect with you and your work, do you have like a website or something that maybe you'd point folks to?
Yeah, no, we have our website. It's ortiztherapygroup.com. We have a contact form. We're also on Facebook and we're on Instagram. I refuse to get on TikTok. So Instagram and Facebook, I would say they're the primary sources where we share, resources and things like that for all of our clients and community. And our website has our blog and things like that where we try to stay as involved as possible. The best way to reach out.
It's been great to connect with you, and so glad you're a member of AFTA. It was so fun to meet you. I think we met at the Denver conference.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So
yeah.
Just really appreciative of that and being in this community together. So thanks so much, Paola.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.